afternoon, pilot teachers and students, and good afternoon, class.
Good afternoon, Mr. Siri.
Okay, you may sit down. All right, as you can see, our topic is on the screen there. This lesson will study something on levers. All right, you have known this since the last topic. Levers are machines that will modify or magnify the force. And we have looked at some very simple machines. Now in this lesson we will basically classify those levers into three types. Okay, type A or type 1 levers, which are of type 2, and levers of type 3. All right, in our last lesson I think I gave you something on a crowbar that is used to lift a stone. Now this is an example of type 1 levers. Why? Because the pivot or the fulcrum is in the middle, and then you have the effort and the load at the ends. All right, this is type 1. Now type 2 levers is where you have the load in the middle. For example, the wheelbarrow is an example of a type 2 lever. Why? Because the load is in the middle, and then you have the fulcrum and the effort at the end. And lastly, you have the type 3 levers. For example, if you are holding a cup, the load inside a cup will have to move, and this time you have the effort that is at the end. Now the fulcrum is at the end, and in the middle you have the load, the pivot. So these are the three types of levers that we will study in this lesson. Towards the end of the lesson I will give you some diagrams, but before that there are some notes or some important points that you can copy down, especially on the type of levers. After that I will give you some pictures, and then you can classify or put these pictures into either type 1, type 2, or type 3 type of levers. So you can start now. This is the information on levers appearing on the screen there. Okay, velocity ratio of the lever can be found by measuring the arms of the marked E and L, which will be shown in the next diagram on the screen. Right, the lever can be found by measuring the two arms of the lever. Okay, that is marked E and L in the diagram. Right, as you can see from the diagram here, okay, this is just a lever here, right? That is the length of the load, and that is the length of the effort. So effort divided by the load will give you the velocity ratio, by how much you are applying or opening up this lever to apply or let it do the work that it was designed to do. right? So the effort would be this length from there to there, and that is where the fulcrum is, or the pivot here, and that is the length. So you have this distance to use to calculate the velocity ratio. Just sketch diagram. Okay, moving on. Velocity ratio, the length of the effort arm and the length of the load arm. Right, as you can see there, the effort arm will be quite long, and the length of the load arm will be quite short. Now, if you can calculate by how much it has moved, right, you will still come up with a figure that is positive and more higher than the load. So that tells you that the length of the effort will be the number given, or it will be that times higher to apply the force. Finish. All right. We will now have a look at the different types of levers. Okay, that is the mechanical advantage. And after we look at this, we'll study the different types of levers. Sure. All right, this is the type of levers, or these are the type of levers that we will study. The first type is the pivot is between the effort and the load. Or let's say another name given to that pivot would be fulcrum. Okay, that is where you have the load, and then the pivot is there in the middle, and at the end you have the effort. Example would be a scissors. If you are using a scissors, this is an example where you have the pivot in the middle, at the end you have the effort and the load. Type 2 levers. This time the load is in the middle, and then you have the effort and the fulcrum, or the pivot at the end. Example would be the wheelbarrow, that it has a load in the middle, and then at the end you have the tire, which would provide the fulcrum and the effort. And the last type of lever will be type 3 levers. Right, this time the effort is in the middle, and it is between the load and the pivot. All right, quickly to explain this, that is step one. If you are using a scissors, that is pivot is here, the effort, and the load. All right, so you have the example of this would be you have the load in the middle there, pivot is over here, and the effort that you. Right. And the last one, let's say this time you are holding a cup, the pivot would be provided by your arm. Okay, that is over here. So you are applying the effort to hold this one, and there is a load that is always moving down. So these are the three types of levers. What I'll do now is to give you some pictures, and using diagram you can state or place those into either type 1, type 2, or type 3. All right, study these diagrams and then you place them or classify those into type 1, type 2, or type 3. All right, here is the first diagram. All right, just imagine if you were using a fishing line, especially if you were from the coast or if you were also from the islands and if you started to use one of these fishing lines to fish, there is always a pivot that is provided at one of the point on that fishing line. So you have to tell us whether this is type 3, type 1, or 2. All right, just like this, if you decide to stand at the fishing line, then you are turning it. All right, type 2. Brother, the next diagram would be next. Write the name beside, and then you probably this should be more helpful if you have to study those. You can just write the names down, and then beside that you write either type 1, type 2, or type 3. All right, moving on to the next diagram. All right, next. All right, this time when you were using a hammer to pull out a nail, if you are using that to pull out a nail, Okay, let's move on. Next. Okay, next. Let's continue with this. Okay, next. All right, those are the diagram and pictures on levers. You can now classify and then put them into the type 1, type 2, or 3. I'll give you some minutes to do that quickly, and then we'll do the correction to those. So I will now ask the pilot students quickly go. You may discuss this with your friends, come up with the answer to those that activity questions, and we'll have it looked at the answer in a moment. You know how many pictures were given? Did you count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Let me see the time. What is the time like? Quarter to 12. Okay. Okay, raise your hands up if you have finished the activity question. All right, that is to put them into the 3 types of levers. All right, we'll now have a look at the answers to that activity. All right, you can volunteer to give us the answer to those activity questions. All right, we'll start with the first one, that is a fishing line. All right, the person who does a lot of fishing will have to tell us why and how he has to use that. Garrett. All right, under what class do we place that fishing line? Type? Okay, let's have a look at this. Okay, type 3 is correct. Why? Because when you were using, all right, just a little demonstration. Let me put it this way. All right, this time, sometimes you may be holding it like this, and then you'll be turning that. All right, the fulcrum is over here, the effort is here, and the load will be the string that is moving down. So you have the effort in the middle there, and then the fulcrum will be there. Or if you're standing it up, probably that is how you'll be turning. Anyway, this is not a fishing line. All right, moving on to the second, that is okay, second diagram. Sauren, you tell us. What's this one?
Type 1.
Type 1. Okay, let's have a look at it, whether it is type 1. Okay, that is correct for the second. The next will be a hammer. Okay, holding a cup. Really.
This type 3.
Type
3.
3. Let's have a look at it. All right, that is correct. Type 3. Why? Because you will always have the fulcrum. That is, your elbow will have to provide the fulcrum. And the effort will be your arms going around the cup, and then the load is on the cup itself. Okay? Next is to have a look at the fourth diagram. That is a picture of a hammer. Okay, who's going to give us the answer to that? Rachel. Type 1. All right, that is correct. Why? Because when you are trying to pull a nail, the back of the hammer will be resting, and then it will be providing some kind of fulcrum. While the end, the claw of that hammer will have to try to pull out the nail, and that is where the load is. All right, so that is type 1. Let's have a look at the spanner. That is in which type? All right, pilot students, you can also do your corrections to your answers. Okay, Kimberly.
1.
Type 1. What do you think?
Type 2.
Type 2. Okay, we have two answers, type 1 and type 2. Let's have a look at this. All right. You can either apply the force each way, whether you are tightening it or loosening it. The fulcrum is simply the screw that is in the wood or piece of metal or something like that. So when you are turning and tightening, you are applying force at one end, and then that is the fulcrum or the pivot, which is simply the screw, or let's say the ball that you are trying to tighten. All right, so that may come under type, or it comes under type 1. All right, moving on to the next. Pliers. Okay, wheelbarrow. Choose. Type 2. Type 2 is correct, and we'll have the next, that is pliers. Nathaniel.
Type 1.
Type 1. Okay, let's have a look at it, whether it is type 1. Okay, yeah, that is correct. And the last. Second last. Okay, what is the scissors? Okay. Joseph.
Type 1.
Right, type 1. Yep, that is correct for scissors. And we have the last, right, the most difficult one. Let's hear from Enara.
Type 2.
Type
2.
Mrs. Michelle.
Type 1.
Type 1, type 2, there are two answers given. Okay, let's see. All right, this is type 2. When you are lifting it up, the force will be in the middle. All right. All right, quickly looking at recapping on what we did in the lesson, velocity ratio can be calculated using the arm of the levers. You will find that the mechanical advantage will also, or is considered from the velocity ratio. And if we have to classify these levers, okay, they will have to come under three types. Type 1 is where you have the fulcrum in the middle, and then you have the load and the effort at the end. Type 2 has the load in the middle, effort and the load would be, rather the fulcrum would be at the end. And type 3 will be the fulcrum at the end, and you have the effort that is in the middle. So those are the classification of the levers. And levers, as you have seen, are machines that will help you modify the force, or in other words, magnify it to a much more larger force so that you can get the work done. All right, so our key phrase, keyword is simply levers. Good afternoon, pilot teachers and students, and good afternoon, model class. Good afternoon, Mr. All right, thank you very much. You may sit down.